Hey everybody, Scott Costa, the publisher of TED Magazine. We're bringing you a breaking news distributed with TED Magazine video podcast today. I got my alert last night around 11 o'clock Central Time, St. Louis time, that Congress had passed the COVID stimulus bill last night. It's expected to be signed by the president today, Tuesday, December the 22nd. So we decided to have Ian Reynolds, who's NAED's general counsel, on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast to break down what exactly is inside that bill for company owners, for employees, just so everybody has an idea of what's coming their way. And Ian does a great job of breaking this stuff down. I want to make sure that you understand everything that's going to be happening over the next couple of days. So enjoy it, my podcast on Distributed with TED Magazine with Ian Reynolds. All right, Ian Reynolds is joining us. He's NAED's general counsel. He's been on top of everything that's been happening in Washington, D.C. It's been kind of crazy over the past month or so. Ian, thanks for joining us on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's jump in. No, really, because this is breaking news. Like, this happened last night, and now you're right here Tuesday morning. So I'm really thrilled that you're doing this. Thanks a ton. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about, the stimulus checks, and let's talk about the unemployment benefits that are in this bill that the president's expected to sign later today on Tuesday. What exactly does that mean?
I wish I could tell you, honestly. Like you said, this is happening very quickly. It passed late last night around midnight. The bill is 5,593 pages long. It literally broke the printers that Congress was using to print it to delay the passage. So there's a lot in here. I don't think anybody has actually read the whole things, but the highlights are, it's going to be good for not only our industry, I think, but the economy. The things that I think are less interesting and more general are the direct payments are going to go out to qualified individuals, $600 per individual and child. There are income thresholds similar to before. Mm-hmm. And then another thing is the extension of the unemployment insurance compensation benefits. So it's going to be an additional $300 a week, which has been extended through March 14th of 21. But there's a lot of really good things for our industry. They announced the full deductibility of expenses for those paid with the PPP loan. And that was always the intent of Congress. It's just the Treasury Department really opposed that. So that was a big win for a lot of people. The employee retention tax credit has been increased and extended into 21, which is a good thing. The commercial buildings tax deduction, or 179 Cap D, is something that NAED and many others have been fighting for a long time. That's finally been made permanent, which is a good win. And then there's some other minor things too. The PPP loans can be used to pay additional things. So it can include property damage, supplier cost, or worker protection expenditures as well.
Well, great. Let's dive into some of these a little bit more in depth. And I know you've read all 5,000 pages. You spent the whole night, awake digging through this. So again, there's an interpretation of this, and I appreciate you doing it. Let's, again, deduction of the expenses for the PPP loans. Again, these are the loans, if you remember back in whatever it was, the second quarter of 2020, back around April, when there was kind of this crazy sort of strange scramble of people, going to their banks to, make sure that they got their applications in time and stuff like that. These now, the expenses that are related to that, what are we talking about here in terms of, what they don't have to pay tax on?
Yeah, so my understanding is they will fully be deductible, which was always the intent. So the items that they use for forgiveness, which was mostly payroll expenses, will now be tax deductible. And like you said, this is a brand new bill, and this is general news stories, not tax advice or legal advice. So certainly we encourage members to talk to their accountants and lawyers, but it will be fully deductible.
And there's a number now, again, for additional PPP loans that are supposed to be made available next month in January. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that is correct. They're going to start right away with that. There was $325 billion dedicated to small businesses out of the $900 billion COVID relief package, and that's tied on to the $1.4 trillion omnibus funding bill. $284 billion of that is dedicated to the PPP loans, and then we have $20 billion dedicated to the economic injury disaster loan, the EIDL program.
An important part, though, of the PPP loans for January, you have to prove that you've had a quarter where you lost, what is it, 25% in gross receipts. Is that correct in 2020? So it's not a blanket, anybody who wants one can have one, correct?
Yeah, there I think are going to be some differences between the second draw of the PPP. Like you said, they're supposed to be able to demonstrate a revenue loss of at least 25%. One of the benefits of the changes to the PPP, though, is they did clarify that the barrier between the employee retention tax credit and the PPP has been removed. So businesses used to have to choose between whether or not they wanted to go with the ERTC or the PPP, and that's no longer the case.
All right, let's dive into this tax credit for sick leave then. And this is an interesting situation because and again, I know every case has, nuances to it. So hang in there with me, but there are a lot of companies that allowed employees to say, hey, you know what? I'm not sick, but I'm afraid I'm going to get sick. So can I go on sick leave? And then there's expenses, obviously, that are attached to that as a company. So explain what that does in terms of providing those tax credits for sick leave during this year.
Yeah, and this is one of the provisions, Scott, that I honestly just have not dived into very deeply. My understanding is the framework is very similar, if not identical, to the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act. So whatever framework was in place for the first time, I think is exactly the same this time.
It is. Okay. So that's a good thing. And then we have to talk about Section 179D, which is obviously the commercial buildings tax deduction. And this is the time, you've been with us for a while. This is that time of the year when we're all scrambling and working with our lobbyists in Washington, and everybody's going crazy saying, are we going to get an extender, for the following year? This relief bill actually makes the, for lack of a better term, the extension permanent, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like you said, this has always been a contentious issue and something that NAED has been working diligently on. The problem is a lot of times Congress does it retroactively. And so even though there is a tax credit associated with it, if it's retroactive, our members have been unable to use that as a strong selling point to get their products out there. And so now that's no longer going to be the case. It's made permanent, and from the get-go, they can use it as a selling strategy.
And this is especially huge for the LED lighting side of stuff. Again, if you can reduce energy by, I don't remember what the number was. We posted a story on it on Lighted yesterday. I think it was 50%, and you get a tax credit on the commercial building every year. And so, when you're talking about the opportunity to retrofit lighting now in every commercial building, I mean, if ever there was one, now you know that the tax credit is going to be permanent. So really a big issue. And again, NAED's been fighting this thing for, I don't know, a decade, I suppose, trying to get it permanent. There's no chance, tell me, at least at this, we all know the definition of permanent. There's no chance this is going to get, eliminated at some point down the road, do you think? Where are we at on that?
I don't think so. Like you said, the definition of permanent, especially for the U.S. Congress, is different than what I, as a lawyer, would probably consider permanent. But you can even see tax credits that are supposed to expire, the Bush-era tax credits, Obama tax credits. Congress has a really hard time getting rid of those once they're in place. So one that has been made permanent, I think, is here for the long run.
And I think finally, an important part of this COVID stimulus bill is something that's not actually in the bill, which is the the liability protection for the employers. A sticking point all month, was a major part of the negotiations and really kind of a stumbling block to getting this done. What does that mean now that there's not going to be, if I have employees that are working for me, what does that mean that I don't have that protection right now?
Well, it's definitely something that NAED has been pushing for and will continue to push for. Like you said, this was one of the items left out in order to reach a compromise. The other was funding for state governments. Right. The Democrats in particular have said that this is not the end, that there will be additional relief measures and stimulus packages. So hopefully we will see some sort of liability protection in the future. It's something that I think businesses would love to see when they're operating during COVID and trying to keep the economy running, especially for those in the electrical industry who have been deemed essential. It would be really nice to have some protection from litigation. That being said, I think it's unfortunate we don't have it, but every year there are communicable diseases in the economy. We've been dealing with the flu forever, and I don't think we have had any members ever complain about their litigation expenses related to customers catching the flu. Now, this is more transmissible, maybe more deadly for sure, but I still think that when you get into it, the causation between having an open business and a customer or employee catching COVID is going to be difficult to prove in court. That doesn't mean that companies won't have litigation expenses, and I certainly, unfortunately, think that there will be lawyers going after businesses for their practices, and that's why hopefully we'll see some liability protection in the future. But like you said, it was left out in this round.
And I read something this morning right before we jumped on this podcast, Mitch McConnell saying there will not be the Senate Majority Leader saying there will not be another stimulus package without that included. So it seems like they compromised on this one, but if there's a future stimulus package, there's not going to be a compromise on that one. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes forward. Where does it go from here? I guess that's the next question. Should we expect more PPP loan? Again, another stimulus package in the end of the first quarter? Does it kind of depend on, how the virus, whether this crazy mutation in Europe or whether the vaccine works? Where do you think it goes from here in terms of, stimulus down the road and the impact on our members?
I personally think we're in a wait and see mode. I think that this COVID relief package took a long time to get to. There's a lot in here. Like we said earlier, people haven't even read the full text of this bill to figure out exactly what is included and what isn't. I think that a lot of it depends on how the vaccine is. Unfortunately, there was new news about a strain of COVID that is mutated and is 70% more transmissible. There are already, I think, 80 countries that have enacted new travel restrictions due to that. Mm-hmm. I think we need to see how the economy recovers, and when the holidays are over, we'll see what happens. But I think, for the next 3 weeks, we're just going to live in what has happened now.
Right. And that, that's a great way of putting it. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast right after, right after Congress passes this and, in the hours before the president's going to sign this bill. So Ian Reynolds, I appreciate the work that you do at NAED. I think our members, are starting to realize, like, geez, it's great to have somebody like Ian around to really, decipher these 5,000 page documents that have a massive impact on the way they have to run their businesses. So thanks a ton for getting up with me this morning and joining me on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. I appreciate it.
Glad I could be of help. Thanks, Scott.
Great, no problem. All right, and listen, if anybody has any more questions about this bill or other podcasts that we're doing, hang in there with me for a second, Ian. Get in touch with me. It's the easiest way right now. Just send me an email, scosta, SCOSTA @NAED.org. We'll do everything we can to help you out and answer any additional questions you have. Until we get a chance to talk again, though, thanks everybody for listening and for watching the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast.